Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 32nd Field Talk organized by Department of Philosophy at Marmara University. I'm very pleased to moderating today's session, especially as this is a particularly special field talk for us. We are happy to welcome back Karim Hoca, a former Oh, okay. Do you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm very sorry. Do you hear me now?
I do.
Yes.
Okay. So the connection was gone from the beginning?
No, I think I made a mistake. I pressed mute. I'm trying to do something. I think I muted you by mistake.
Okay, no problem. No problem. The title of today's talk is Political Inclusion and the Requirement of Public Reason. But before we begin, let me briefly introduce our speaker. For many of you, he is already a familiar person, but for the new members and for the new students or for the other people, let me introduce our Karim Hoca. Dr. Karim Sadek received his PhD in philosophy from Georgetown University, and since then he had teaching and research position at a number of institutions, including American University of Beirut, the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, Boğaziçi University, Ibn Haldun University, the Free University of Berlin, University College Dublin, and of course, Marmara University. He's currently assistant professor of philosophy at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. His research focuses on critical social theory, Islamic political thought, and democratic theory, and the ethics of argumentation. Karim Hocam, we are very happy to have you with us again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nurdani Hoja, for the intro, and I'm very happy to be here, and thank you everyone for showing up. I'll just start with a few remarks. This talk is I'm reworking a paper that I wrote a while ago. I never got to publish it, and now I would like to publish it. So I took another look at it, reorganized a few things, and just giving it another stamp. I also want to say that when I was doing so, I realized that the paper is a little bit overambitious. I'm trying to achieve more than I actually can in a paper. So I had to opt for somewhat more condensed presentation to avoid going into some details that if I do go into, I might take too much time. So the main aim of the presentation actually is to give you a key central argumentative juncture in the paper. So I'll begin. So the let me see how I switch. Okay. So the the range of approaches in normative democratic theory that emphasize political communication in processes of public reasoning is extensive. The idea behind, let's say, most of these approaches is that we should not rely, or it's not enough to rely solely on aggregative mechanisms such as elections and the constitutional protection of individual rights. Right? And while elections might be necessary for democratic decisions, and individual rights are essential for the recognition of citizens as free and equals, they are insufficient for the full realization of the democratic ideals of freedom and equality. And the range of theories that rely on, in one way or another, on public reasoning includes liberals, deliberative accounts, agonistic theories of democracy. They all depend on some variants of public reasoning, deliberation, persuasion, contestation. And the point is to extend citizens' participation and engagement across multiple spheres of social and political life. And the easiest way to see it is that we need to talk and argue with each other before we go vote, right? Of course, the debate is much more complicated, but I'm interested in this whole kind of very large bunch of democratic theories. Now, so I want primarily is to just point out the centrality of public reasoning, of reasoning together collectively in public. And my focus is for today is the normative regulation of public reasoning. And what standards determine or should determine which contributions made by citizens are permitted to have a justificatory role in legislation and public policy. I want to defend two claims, right? The first claim is that the normative regulation of public reasoning should target ways of reasoning, not reasons themselves. The second claim is that individual work on the self or self-work is a crucial condition for meaningful and effective citizen participation in public reasoning. My presentation is in 3 parts. In the first part, I present a dilemma that concerns political inclusion and the task of stipulating norms for regulating public reasoning. In the second part, I suggest a way out of this dilemma. And my suggestion is that the normative regulation of public reasoning should target ways of reasoning. That would be my first claim, rather than reasons. And here, in this same part, second part, I will introduce the concept of non-authoritarian reasoning, a requirement for public reasoning that focuses on how arguments are exchanged, not the content of reasons or individual arguments. Finally, in the third part, I show that the successful application of non-authoritarian reasoning depends on individual work on the self. So on to part 1. As I said, I'm interested in the normative regulation of public reasoning. That is, I'm interested in the criteria or the standards that determine which contributions should be allowed into public debate and hence be permitted to play a justificatory role in law and policy making. Now, a significant part of this debate regarding the normative regulation revolves around the status of religious contributions in public debate. Roughly, we have, it's typical to distinguish between exclusivists and inclusivists. So the exclusivist position in this debate is that religious reasons should be excluded from legal and political justification. They contend, exclusivists, that allowing religious justifications fails to respect citizens as free and equals, since religious reasons are not shared or are not accessible or are not accessible, and there are different views there. Exclusivists are thus keen to impose certain requirements on public reasoning, right, such as shareability or accessibility. An exclusivist could argue, for example, that religious reasons should not be permitted into public debates because they are not shared by or accessible to all concerned citizens. Arguments like blah, 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 because the Bible says so, are inadmissible in public debate. Inclusivists by contrast, object to this exclusion. Typically, their objections highlight a certain form of inequality that threatens democratic citizenship. They argue, for instance, that barring and excluding religious reasons from public debates imposes an asymmetric burden on religious citizens, undermining their democratic standing. Now, the debate between exclusivists and inclusivists is much more nuanced and can be complicated, but what concerns me in this debate is that they both share, both sides, inclusivists and exclusivists, they share the same assumption. And I want to attack that assumption. So the assumption is that both sides presuppose what I call reasons-based regulation, right, on public reasoning. So such regulations evaluates contributions based on the content of reasons. So they would label it a religious reasoning or a secular reasoning. And in the case of the exclusivists, they would say religious reasons are not public reasons, so they should not play a role. To classify, now it's important to realize that to classify a reason as religious or secular or Marxist or whatever, we must analyze the content of the reason. For instance, we have to identify references to divine authority to say that it is religious reason. Now, I find reasons-based regulation to be problematic, mainly because I think it undermines inclusion, which is a cornerstone for democratic politics. I mean, this is widely agreed that in order to, and inclusion is necessary. Even fair inclusion is required and necessary for legitimate democratic decision making. Now, why? I mean, why I think that it violates inclusion. In what sense are reasons-based requirements exclusionary? When you filter contributions based on contents, example, religious reasons, and put this as the rules for the debates, we design a political order that systematically sidelines certain perspectives. Here, the religious perspective. For example, contributions grounded in Islamic values will be dismissed from the get-go and from the very beginning, even if they address shared concerns like social justice, they reflect a community's identity, or they express the grievances of that community. They cannot play a justificatory role. Now, this constitutes a type of exclusion, which I think is a distinct form of marginalization, where contributions are excluded by the very norms governing public debate, and by design. Okay. So by way of kind of locating that form of exclusion, I call structural exclusion. I find it helpful to locate it within two conceptions of exclusion identified by Iris Marion Young. And I think structural exclusion, as I will show now, is different from both, but also shares some common elements. So Young, according to Young, external exclusion occurs when, quote, individuals or groups that ought to be included are purposely or inadvertently left out of fora for discussion and decision making, end quote. In very straightforward terms, basically, you are not invited to the debates or the party or whatever. You're just externally excluded, not invited. Internal exclusion, on the other hand, might obtain even if or when individuals and groups are formally included, yani they are invited. So in that sense, it is different from external exclusion. So the groups, individuals are invited into decision-making processes. Still, a certain kind of exclusion occurs, an internal exclusion. This is because formally included constituencies might still find that, quote, others ignore or dismiss or patronize their statements and expressions, that their claims are not taken seriously and may believe that they are not treated with equal respect. Right? So this would be internal exclusion. Now, structural exclusion is different from, yet shares aspects with both external and internal exclusion. With structural exclusion, individuals and groups are formally included. They are invited, but some of their contributions are excluded by design. And it is different from external exclusion since it obtains even when constituencies are formally included in processes of public reasoning. In this respect, it resembles internal exclusion. But since structural exclusion applies to the exclusion can still occur because the exclusion in structural exclusion, like internal exclusion, applies not to the presence of individuals, applies to the contributions of the individuals. But whereas internal exclusion applies to the contribution with respect to how the other person listens, or what we call uptake, the uptake of that contribution, to what extent it's is considered fairly by the others. The structural exclusion happens because the contribution, not the individuals, not the groups, the contributions, certain contributions are not even allowed from the get-go to play a role. Maybe here just a quick example. For instance, consider the representative of a Muslim minority in a meeting for environmental policy, who offers a faith-based argument for encouraging small green businesses. Now, that argument will not be considered as a valid justification for public policy, irrespective of what attendees think of it and of its quality, but simply because religious content is deemed inadmissible by design, the structure of the debate, i.e., the rules, in this case, of policymaking debates. So structural exclusion of this sort is significant. Why is it important not to exclude people in this way? It's significant not only because faith-based arguments might have a positive effect on policymaking, but also because, and this is what matters to me more, it blocks in advance the expression and reflection of that Muslim community, in my example, deeply held convictions, commitments, and sense of identity. They have to somehow keep it at bay. They cannot defend their views for a certain policy on the basis of what they think is most relevant and important in their lives. For them, yani. Now, this form, structural exclusion, has a solution. I mean, democratic theory has a solution for it. Right? There is a democratic response in the literature to such exclusion. Scholars like Ivision, Tully, and Taylor offer a remedy. Now, those authors were particularly troubled by the unfair exclusion of marginalized voices, typically indigenous people and colonized people, which in turn, that worry, being troubled by such unfair exclusion, drove those theorists and informed and impacted how they conceived of the role of public reasoning and of the relationship between public reasoning and democracy. As far as the inclusion of marginalized voices is concerned, those Democrats were particularly concerned with how power relations infiltrate political discourse, and consequently, what is considered acceptable or reasonable or justifiable. And this is, in a nutshell, this is their concern, that society is filled of power relations, and let's say the white man somehow has its own understanding of what is a reasonable contribution, an acceptable contribution, or a justifiable one. And that gets to be the filter for what contributions are allowed or not allowed. This is why, for those Democrats, call them post-colonial Democrats, democratic norms themselves must be contested or must be contestable. They must be up for debate. Right? If we want to contest the very rules that are regulating our conversation, we should be allowed to do so. Now, my contention is that from that perspective, structural exclusion is seen as the result of a misguided way of thinking about the relationship between democracy and public reasoning. Instead of starting with already accepted substantive understanding of democratic norms, which inform the normative regulation of public reasoning to ensure democratic legitimacy, we should think of democratic norms as themselves a subject of controversy among social constituencies. So here we have two kinds of views. On the first view, norms that restrain public debate, acceptable, accessible, get determined, and political contestation must take place within these norms. Right? In the second instance, second view, however, the very norms that restrain public debate are themselves contested or can be contested and subject to questioning. Here, the norms that regulate public reasoning can themselves evolve and change through debate. Now, on this alternative account, and going back to our example of the Islamic politics from above, religious reasons are allowed in public debate and can express and reflect Muslim constituencies' deeply held convictions, grievances, and sense of identity. Now, this remedial alternative reflects a it's maybe helpfully, I'll just say. This remedial alternative reflects a methodological shift from approaches to democracy and diversity that, A, start with substantive democratic norms, principles, or commitments, and then figure out the sort and extent and way of accommodating diversity in society. So we have an understanding of democracy. We see democracy requires 1, 2, 3. There's a certain society is pluralist, but we use these norms, this understanding to say, okay, given this understanding of democracy, if you want legitimate political authority, we have to constrain the discussion in certain ways, such as this is basically what the exclusivists argue. So here, the typical examples are John Rawls and Jürgen Habermas, and they are different than each other. Anyway, we can talk about that. B, now the second view, we start from already present diversity, and then we argue against certain substantive norms, principles, or commitments for their failure to accommodate diversity. Okay, I hope so. Here we're starting from the other side. We start from the fact that people are different in these specific ways that a society exhibits at a certain point in time. And if the current norms, our understanding of democracy, don't fit that plurality, we revise the norm. We contest it at least. Okay. Now, we can, so now I can, so now the dilemma, we can see the dilemma, I think. In order not to exclude the already underprivileged in society and to be sensitive to the whole range of social grievances and social demands for justice demands, we should not define in advance, and this is the key term, We should not define in advance the norms of public reasoning and fix restrictions on what count as reasonable, what count as acceptable, what count as accessible. In this way, when we do so, when we refrain from the in advance definitions, we augment political inclusion. So this is the first horn. We want this. We want to increase inclusion, and to do so, it seems, if I'm right in my previous argument, then we need to allow for the contestation of norms themselves. However, doing so engenders a normative laxity that undermines the ability to detect violations and distortions of public reasoning and to check an oppressive majority. Only by imposing some sort of restrictions on public reasoning will we be able to eliminate the use of force, threats, coercion. It's through such restrictions that we can augment political legitimacy. So this is the second horn of the dilemma. So the challenge that I want to try to address is how to stipulate norms, right? How to decide, come up with, determine norms of public reasoning that balance inclusion and legitimacy, and how to stipulate norms while being inclusive or without being exclusive. So now, basically, my answer is we should target ways of reasoning, not reasons. To resolve the challenge of stipulating norms while maintaining inclusivity, I propose regulating public reasoning by focusing on ways of reasoning rather than the content of reasons, right? Rather than reasons themselves. The key insight is that social and political interactions can become oppressive or exclusionary, not only through the standards they enforce, but through the manner in which they are conducted. And to reconcile inclusion with legitimacy, norms must regulate how arguments are made, how they are delivered, given, and how they are listened to and received. Not what arguments are made, not the specific individual argument, validity, soundness, etc. Or meeting other stands like public reasoning, stands secular reason, let's say. Now, this content independent. The first we had reasons dependent. Now reasons, instead of calling it reasons independent, it's actually content independent regulation avoids sidelining perspectives based on their substance. So no one gets excluded on the basis of the kind of worldview that they hold. Now, Maeve Cook, critical social theorist, offers a requirement. She calls it the requirement of non-authoritarian reasoning. And I think this requirement offers a model for precisely this suggestion. It excludes the requirement of non-authoritarian reasoning, excludes authoritarian reasoning or authoritarian ways of reasoning, defined as reasoning that undermines ethical autonomy by violating situated rationality. So what does this mean? There isn't much that hang on this, but it's good to just explain it. Ethical autonomy is the individual counterpart to political autonomy, Cook writes. It rests on the intuition that the freedom of human beings consists in important measure in the freedom to form and pursue their conceptions of the good on the basis of reasons that they are able to call their own, end quotes. Situated rationality has an epistemological and an ethical dimension. And so authoritarian reasoning obtains when a way of reasoning undermines ethical autonomy by violating situated rationality's epistemological and or ethical dimension. So what is the epistemological dimension? A citizen's reasoning is authoritarian when her conception of knowledge, quote, restricts access to knowledge to a privileged group of people, end quote. It is coupled with a tendency to, quote, assert the availability of a standpoint removed from the influences of history and context that could guarantee the unconditional validity of claims to truth and rightness, end quote. The ethical dimension, a citizen's reasoning, quote, splits off validity of propositions and norms from the reasoning of the human subjects for whom they are proclaimed to be valid, end of quote. So I know this might sound maybe confusing, so I kind of summarizes it in my own language and simply. In a nutshell, a citizen's reasoning is authoritarian when her conception of knowledge is atemporal, objective, and impartial, and or when her conception of justification does not take into account the interests of those for whom it is intended, and its addressees. The employment of such conceptions of knowledge and or justification undermine the idea that individual autonomy requires the freedom to form and pursue one's conception of the good on the basis of reasons that one is able to call her own. The point of imposing a requirement of non-authoritarian reasoning is to exclude authoritarian contributions from public debates. In this regard, and going back to our example of Islamic politics, it is worth noting that according to Cook, there is no in-principle objection against religious reasoning being non-authoritarian reasoning. She writes, quote, there is no conflict in principle between non-authoritarian reasoning and an orientation towards some otherworldly, transcendent source of validity. For example, God or the good, end quote. That is, in a simpler way, one can be religious without internalizing and acting on the basis of authoritarian conceptions of knowledge and justification. The employment of religious reasons and religious arguments does not necessarily entail authoritarianism. Any citizen, religious, atheists, what have you, that internalizes and acts based on an authoritarian conception of knowledge and or of justification would exhibit authoritarianism, and their contribution should be excluded from public debates. I mean, in other words, I argued that it's possible in the case of specifically the Islamic case, drawing on the works of Rashid al-Ghannouchi, to accept an absolute objective divine authority where you can have access to the content of these divine prescriptions and still not exhibit authoritarian modes of reasoning. Okay, now I think at this point, I forgot to, sorry. Okay. So now I thought you were a little bit confused. You're probably now very confused. Okay. I forgot to skip, go through 2 slides with all the quotations. Anyway, so there is an objection, right? Someone might object that, listen, non-authoritarian reasoning still imposes norms. You talked about ethical autonomy and situated rationality. This is why previously I said, and the specific content of these terms, it's for me, for the purposes of this paper, I can leave them like a black box for now, at least. I mean, in the discussion, maybe we can talk about this. But if non-authoritarian reasoning imposes norms, why doesn't the dilemma about that I discussed gets reintroduced? Right? We didn't really run away from the dilemma or got out of it. But I think we did. So my response to the objection is, yes, it does. I mean, I think that the dilemma is reintroduced, but this time it is reintroduced in a different configuration. And this configuration is, I think, key. Previously, in the first version of the dilemma or appearance of the dilemma, the target of the norms for regulating public reasoning was content-laden reasons, religious reasons. Abortion should not be legal because the Bible says so. Now, the target, in the second appearance of the dilemma, the target is content-free. It is ways in which reasons are traded. So visually, if I have a ball in my hand, I can deliver it to you nicely. I can throw it at you. There are many ways I can give you that object. So if you think of arguments as products, premises, conclusion, there are many ways we can trade them. And it's the manner in which this happens that I want to focus on. In the new configuration, the challenge arises within a two-pronged structure for the normative regulation of public reasoning. The first prong concerns the content of reasoning. On this prong, on this side, no perspective on the world is considered an ineligible ground or source of content for reasons, arguments, contributions. We cannot exclude, again, any worldview conception of the goods based on its content. On the second prong, however, the second prong is concerned with ways of reasoning. And here, the ways in which participants communicate, deliver, and present their reasons, arguments, and contributions is constrained. There is a constraint here. Now, how this two-pronged configuration, how is it helpful? And at any one point in time, when the requirement of non-authoritarian reasoning is at work, it will express a substantive interpretation of ethical autonomy and situated rationality. I grant that. On any such interpretation, particular interpretation at a particular point in history, time, certain ways of giving and receiving reasons count as authoritarians, but no reason will per se be deemed ineligible for trading in public debate. However, what happens typically, and these are the kinds of cases that are relevant for the talk, mostly relevant for this talk, are cases of normative crisis, right? So we are questioning these norms. We are disagreeing. We're having deep disagreements, maybe. So in times of crisis, operative interpretations of ethical autonomy and situated rationality will get contested. People will start saying, no, this is not what I mean by ethical autonomy. You have no right to claim that X, Y, and Z is a violation of ethical autonomy. So now we are debating ethical autonomy, which was supposed to be regulating our conversation. The application of the requirement is destabilized as actual participants struggle to settle on a revised or a new interpretation of ethical autonomy and situated rationality. With the two-pronged configuration, operative interpretations of ethical autonomy and situated rationality, i.e., the restraint on public reasoning, they are one step removed from what is being restrained, i.e., the ways of reasoning. Right? Being so removed implies that when participants contest the operative interpretation, they are in effect shifting the discussion by raising a different question. They shift from debating policies and laws to debating how to construe the norms that is supposed to govern their debating policies and laws, right? So very simply, at point T1, we have norms we are discussing and happy to discuss, I don't know, let's say a certain policy about, say, the environment. Point T2, we have a disagreement about this policy. We start debating. The disagreement reach a point that we start questioning the very norms that is supposed to regulate our debates. So you tell me, like I said before, what you are claiming is actually a violation of my ethical autonomy, which is informing the ways of reasoning. And I tell you, no, it's not. So now we are contesting the rules of the game, it's not a disagreement within the rules of the game. When requirements for public reasoning target reasons, on the other hand, these steps are interwoven. It's very difficult to separate debates about the policy versus debates about the rules that are supposed to regulate our debating the policy. And such a shift is not readily available. The two-pronged structure in the normative regulation of public reasoning creates a space for greater movement in responding to the dilemma of how to stipulate norms while being inclusive. And the requirement of non-authoritarian reasoning is formally indeterminate, in the sense that it always has room for different specifications of the content of ethical autonomy and situated rationality. It is within actual social practices that the requirement becomes determinate. And in the face of new social and political challenges, previously determined specifications get revised, and through actual contestation and struggles, new interpretations emerge and different specifications congeal. By denouncing regulation from content, by decoupling the regulation of public debate from the content of reasons, my suggestion balances inclusion and legitimacy. Marginalized voices can engage on their own terms, while norms guard against authoritarian discourse, norms that has to do with how you engage. I'm almost done. So this is this is pretty short, but I think it's important and relevant. But probably in the actual version of the paper, I'll leave this to a separate paper. Now, the final question I address concerns the agential conditions necessary for non-authoritarian reasoners, i.e. individuals who have internalized non-authoritarian conceptions of knowledge and justification, right? My question basically is, what are the conditions in order for such individuals, right, who have the proper understanding of knowledge and justification, what are the conditions for them to actually, in reality, engage effectively in public debates? Now, the core concern is that even well-intentioned non-authoritarian reasoners risk dismissing marginalized voices or just views that differ from theirs significantly. Why? Because engaging with others inevitably challenges our interpretation of norms, values, principles, right? Now, such challenges can threaten our sense of identity, and they can trigger defensiveness. We become defensive. Thus, the success of non-authoritarian reasoning depends on an individual's attitude towards their own identity, specifically whether they adopt what I call fundamentalist versus non-fundamentalist stances or attitudes. I'm not happy with the terminology, but I haven't yet found better ones. So what are these attitudes? The fundamentalist attitudes, it's some kind of an affective, it's an attachment. It's a rigid attachment fixed to the specific instantiations, right? To the particular understanding of norms, to my understanding of what freedom of speech means, right? I am attached to that, to the way I understand, my particular understanding of. Someone else agrees that we have to protect freedom of speech, but they have a very different understanding of what freedom of speech actually means. So, for example, my secular identity requires rejecting all religious reasoning. And someone might, there is an illustrative example later. Yeah, so just one second. I think that when we identify with our particular understanding or particular interpretation or specification of principles and norms and values, the consequence of that is that there is the existential space within us between the abstract and the concrete collapses. And therefore, deviating from that particular understanding will be experienced or perceived by the individual as a threat to who they take themselves to be. And hence they close off dialogue. So even the non-authoritarian reasoner who has the proper conception of knowledge and justification, if they adopt a fundamentalist attitude and their attachment is with their particular understanding of norms and values and ideas, they will in practice turn to act in authoritarian ways. So the non-fundamentalist attitude, what is it? It is here the affective attachment, the attachment to your particular understanding is mediated through the abstract norms of, let's say, fairness or autonomy, or depending on what we are talking about. The result is that the individual views their current commitments as provisional interpretations, open to re-examination. Abstract norms act as tools to reflect on the historical contingency and future implications of their identity. Here, there is an existential space. Sometimes I call it an internal wiggle room. This dynamic openness allows individuals to revise commitments without feeling their core identity is under attack. So I have an example, hoping it will clarify. At least gives us something to talk about. Imagine a secular person raised in a tradition that equates belief in divine authority with inherently authoritarian behavior. For example, they believe that religious people impose their views by appealing to God. Right? Over time, this person, they encounter different religious arguments that explicitly rejects imposing beliefs onto others. For example, a religious person might say, my faith compels me. I'm obliged, according to my faith, to respect others' autonomy. So I cannot impose, I'll be violating my own religion if I impose upon you. And it is in the person's experience with the secular, with the religious, the secular it's clear to him or her that those religious people making such arguments, they are not imposing their views. I mean, in their experience, there is no imposition. There is an argument against their own belief. Now, if this person adopts a fundamentalist attitude, then they will rigidly cling to the view that any appeal to divine authority is authoritarian, period. So all religious reasoning is coercive, period. There is no room for debate here. Critiques of this stance, say when you come up with nuanced theological arguments for pluralism, or to say my religion requires me not to impose, etc., feel like existential threats because it's questioning their view. Right? It risks destabilizing their identity. What is their identity in this example? They are the defenders of secular rationality. they dismiss religious contributions outright, right? If they adopt a non-fundamentalist attitude, how would it look like? They would hold secular commitments sincerely, but they maintain this existential space, this internal wiggle room. They see their current interpretation of the link between divine authority and authoritarianism as one possible framework, not the only one, to understand religious reasoning and a religious way of life. When challenged, they reflect. Does my critique of religious reasoning align with my own norms? Say fairness, autonomy in this case. Could revising my stance deepen rather than betray my commitments to these norms? Especially that in their actual experience, the actual argumentative engagement, the other person is not being like imposing. Now, this existential space or internal wiggle room allows them to engage religious critiques without defensiveness, even if they retain skepticism about divine authority. The point is not to say the other one is correct. The point is to create the space within yourself to take into consideration what the other person is saying for on the basis of what they are saying and how they are behaving. Now, I mean, I have a very short conclusion, but just to relate this to this idea of self-work or individual work on the self. I mean, my claim is that you cannot develop a non-fundamentalist attitude if you don't work on yourself. You have to become of what triggers you, become aware of what triggers you. You have to do maybe practices. And the history of humanity is full of these. I mean, all ancient traditions have some kind of practices on how to detach from the ego, transcend your fear, blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of resources out there. So what I mean here, this is why self-work. What I mean, self-work is required to be able to develop a non-fundamentalist attitude, which is a condition that is a agential condition. It's a condition that concerns the agent, so that agent could actually act in accordance to the non-authoritarian conceptions of knowledge and justification. So, in a very brief conclusion, I tried to show that a robustly inclusive democracy requires regulating public reasoning by focusing on how we argue, not what we argue. The requirements of non-authoritarian reasoning achieves this by excluding authoritarian ways of arguing, be they religious or secular or whatever, shamanic, you choose your thing. In this way, we can address the dilemma of how to stipulate norms while being inclusive, which in turn offers us a way out of the potential tension between inclusion and legitimacy. I previously noted. I also tried to show how non-authoritarian reasoning success hinges on individual work on the self. Without work on the self, you can't develop my claim, non-fundamentalist attitudes. Cultivating a non-fundamentalist attitude creates an existential space or a wiggle room that enables constructive argumentative engagements with those who differ from us and makes possible reflection on and revision of the relationship between identity and values, what you take yourself to be, and the values in their abstract form that you take yourself to be committed to. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Karim Hocam, for this talk. I guess now we can move on to Q&A section. And so if you have questions, please raise your virtual hand, or you might write in the chat box. So I will try to go accordingly how I see in my screen, if it is okay with you. So I see Ali Sayed Hocam first. So Hocam, please go on first.
Thank you, Hocam. Hocam, first, we are very happy to see you again, and we meet. I think all your voice and very good English. And for your presentation, it was very rich, and a lot of argumentation and very well explained. I think for understanding well, I should listen again, and I will do it if I have time, of course. Very quick question I will ask right now. If I ask a very general question, forgive me first, but it is very quick question. I think that in this discussion, the main problem remains on the distinction or relation between the powerful and, if you like, free speech or free argumentation or free right of politics, etc. So if we look, and it is very clear in the history of politics that you can find this dialectic works everywhere, even in the very democratic systems. You have, and you talk about it, I think, as the dilemma. So even we can follow democratic rules, even radical democratic rules, in some point or at the beginning, the agent of politics, agent of making decision, or the governmentality or the subject of government determines all of the rules, determines all of the possibility of discussion, all of the construction, all of the rules of construction. So it is the point that we are in the politics. We are always in some rules, in some restriction, and after that, of course, it happens some problems, some discussions, some new case in which we can encounter the problems, the conflicts, etc. And if very quickly, if I ask, how could we think about this relationship in non-authoritarian views? I think it is not possible to think. So we should accept at the least the dimension of authoritarian, the dimension of authoritarian politics, and all the problem is based on this dimension, I think. Who creates the politics? Who constructs the politics? And in which limits who constructs? And it is beyond all of the theory, I think, and it concerns the practical relationship of powerful, fact, brutal, raw, powerful. So this is my question. What do you think about this dilemma, or if you improve a little more? Thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Hojam. Thank you. I think this is at the core of and this is precisely what I'm trying to do. I mean, and here's one way to answer without taking too much time. I try to distinguish between contestation within the rules and contestations of the rules. Okay? So a very simple example, just to make it like crystal clear. We can debate if we are playing chess. Let's think of chess like there are rules, right? There are rules that determine the game of chess, and we are playing. And then I start. We can debate whether my move is the best or the worst move. Is it a move that will make me lose or my king or not, based on the rules of chess? But you might come and someone might say, I want to contest the rules of chess themselves. Now, in the case of chess, okay, when you do so, you are playing a different game, right? If you start moving your pawn the way you want, you're playing a different game. But this is not the case I'm thinking of democracy, let's say, as a game. There are rules for playing this politics, and these rules have to be abided by. However, sometimes we need to contest the very rules themselves. Now, what I'm saying is that when we do so, we have to figure out a way to conceive of democratic politics and democracy and normative democratic theory in a way that when we contest rules, we are not outside of democracy. It's not that we are stopped playing democracy and now we're playing something else. We're still playing democracy, but we are redefining. This is democracy. Democracy is when we come up with our rules and get ruled by them, and then. So this is one thing. Just I think it's important to keep it. And I think, my modest understanding of democratic theory, I think this is the main distinction between the agonist politics and the others. I mean, the agonists, they want to contest the norms. The others, they want to contestation within the norms. And both have very good reasons. This is key. Contestation within the norms is key because your priority there is what? Political legitimacy. When you want to contest the rules, you are moving away from political legitimacy. You have other concerns. Meeting the demands of, the inclusion in my case here, but also there are concerns such as citizenship, building bonds, recognizing the individuals and the communities for who they are, even if we think they are crazy. Now, how can we combine this? How can I mix this contestation within the rules, contestation over the rules in the same model? Right? It is important to realize here very quickly is that when you say that at any one point there are rules and they can be authoritarian, this is true. But don't forget, this is temporarily. Things might change. To put it in a different way, even simpler way, think of it like this. Authoritarianism is not a one-time thing. Just like emancipation is not just a one-time thing. One action, you cannot say this is authoritarian just because of one action. This is something that has to happen in a process. So when in the Arab Spring, for example, we had revolts, it would be, I think, completely immature if we say, khalas, we achieved emancipation. No, you have to follow up on it. There is a zillion other things that has to be done. And this is why today, for example, people look back and say, at least some say it completely failed. Others say, it's debatable in what way it succeeded or failed. But obviously, it has been hijacked, to say the least. So was that moment an emancipatory? Was that emancipation? Well, it was an emancipatory moment. And I think you also have to think that there are authoritarian moments. But you cannot pass the judgment just because there was I think I'll stop here because but I hope this is helpful, Hojam.
I have a question.
Yes, Ishak Hocam, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Karim Hocam. I have, my question is a little bit different. At the beginning, in your presentation, you mentioned some form of dilemma. As far as I remember truly, there is this norms and values and being inclusiveness. But the question is that how to avoid some challenges or obstacles. I mean, especially we are not living in a classical time. In the contemporary age, when we think about technological revolutions and digital revolutions, there are many, many challenges, obstacles that we mention in this sense. For instance, high-tech companies, AI algorithms, some populist groups and influencers. So when we think about these kind of technological influences, how can we avoid, to create, let's say, a democratic or neutral debate, public debate? Can you talk about this kind of risks?
Sure. So thank you. So, of course, there are obstacles, and it's also worth mentioning here that there are also theoretical problems in my model that needs to be developed, but the obstacles you are pointing out to, they are practical. And this is, I think, the why it is very important to, and I didn't want to exclude it, this idea of work on the self. So to put it very simply, we say that spending 10 hours a day on your phone affects your ability to, let's say, clear judgment, let's say, might increase anxiety. It also inadvertently, without you accepting or wanting or whatever, the mere fact that you are surfing and scrolling, etc.
Yeah, fake news, for instance,
There is an
censorship.
algorithm that's predicting your behavior and somehow being able to, let's say, manipulate, guide you if need be. So this is precisely why if someone thinks like this, honestly, genuinely, they have to take a distance from these, let's say, social media or phone time. We cannot say, oh, I cannot, I have to keep, it's very important, I need my phone, I have to keep checking my phone, and what if something happens, what if they liked or disliked, what if, agree that this undermines your ability to be, free and autonomous, and say, okay, so now how can I be free and autonomous? It doesn't work like this. And you must do the work, and the work is difficult, and it's increasingly so. And it's a fact of our world. I think we are going in a very bad self-destructive state, because neither AI nor capital has any kind of restrictions. If it makes money, it's good, period. Right? So if we don't develop our capacities as individuals, we will be subject to these, call them manipulations. And one objection here to what I'm saying is that this model is too demanding. And for this objection, I say, yes, it is too demanding, and I bite the bullet. In short, if we really want to live in societies that is pluralists, and everyone is included and treated as an equal and free individual and or groups, then we have to raise the kind of individuals we are. And liberals don't like this. Liberals, they don't want to interfere in the life of the individual. And I think this is the problem. We have a responsibility to work on ourselves, raise our consciousnness, become aware of these things, do what is required to preserve whatever is left of our agency. Maybe I overread it, but this is, I would go in this direction. This is my direction. I mean, yeah.
Thank you, Hocam. I see Müge Hoca has a question. So, Hocam, please go on. Müge Hocam, sesiniz kısık kaldı.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting. And I'm really sympathetic with, in general, like very generally, I'm very sympathetic with philosophical positions that try to consider like constraints, look from the constraint point of view, look from a meta point of view. So I'm very sympathetic to that, and it's very difficult to articulate such positions. So thank you very much. So in your model, you, I mean, I note that you differentiate, have some differentiations. Three things come. I pick three things that you differentiate. So you differentiate between authoritative and non-authoritative claims to knowledge, justification, or ways of reasoning. You differentiate between the content of the belief, whether the evidence is like resorting to divine authority or absolute objective authority. So this is the content, and the other one is, I guess, more has to do with the method or the way of reasoning. And then at the last part of your talk, you made the distinction between fundamentalist and non-fundamentalist attitudes. So first of all, this non-authoritative reasoning and non-fundamentalist attitude with regards to your own position. what's the difference between them? I think understanding this may also help contribute to your main arguments, which tries to distinguish between the content, which is like someone can believe in the absolute divine authority and yet be non-authoritarian with regards to their justification. So can you please clarify this distinction between non-fundamentalist attitude and non-authoritative reasoning?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, authoritarian reasoning, not authoritative, because I want authoritative reasoning. I mean, authoritarian, okay. So authority, let's simply, authority can be authoritative. Think of it as legitimate authority, or it can be authoritarian. Okay. So based on the talk, and the first answer is this, is that authoritarian versus non-authoritarian ways of reasoning is some kind of theoretical articulation of modes of reasoning, of ways of relating to the other inside of an argumentation engagement. So it's the way I am understanding it is like I said, it's like if you think of the ball, call it an argument, or this bottle, call it an argument. It is made out of premises and conclusion. And what I do with this, how I give you the bottle, you ask me for water, I can open it and I put it on your heads. Here's your water, right? So, or I can give it to you, or I can drink it and then give you the bottle. You asked for the bottle, I gave you the bottle. I mean, I'm just saying there are many different ways I can trade, I can exchange these products. And this is why I'm increasingly more interested in what is called argumentation theory. Argumentation theory thinks of argument and argumentation as an activity, not as product, premises, conclusion. And I'm working on argumentation theory precisely to unpack this idea of non-authoritarian reasoning. But until now, this is a theoretical model. It has to do with an understanding of situated rationality, of ethical autonomy, conceptions of knowledge, conceptions of justification. Now, non-fundamentalist attitude is a condition that must be present in the person in order for this person to execute, to bring to life inside of an argumentative engagement, this theory, this non-authoritarian, let's call it theory. To bring it into practice, I must develop certain capacities. And I try to articulate this capacity in terms of self-work and schematize it by saying, well, it's some kind of a relationship with your own particular understanding. So I might honestly, sincerely believe that I have a conception of knowledge that is not authoritarian. It's temporal, it's contextual, it's historical. It meets all the conditions. I also sincerely, honestly, genuinely try to take into account the view of the other when I'm giving them justification. So also my conception of justification, I even demonstrate for this. I mean, I'm like a real activist about this, right? However, when I sit with someone and start to argue and they tell me they eat meat, I go crazy. Because this is the example, right? Imagine like I'm an authoritarian vegetarian about vegetarianism. How can you eat meat, right? You are killing soul, etc., etc. So I cannot bring myself to put in practice this theory that I have about knowledge and justification. So I end up in reality, when I'm talking with non-vegetarians, I end up being authoritarian in my argumentation with them. I impose my views, I silence them, I dismiss I don't really take into consideration the content of their views. For me, this is just out of the question. However, when we sit and talk about, I don't know, other topics, environment, LGBT, whatever, I'm super non-authoritarian. right? So there are things that trigger me, or so the idea is there is a concept and there is the particular of that concept, which is my understanding of the concept. Now, if I treat my particular understanding of the concept as the concept, you end up being fundamentalist. Your attitude becomes fundamentalist, no matter how good intentioned you are. Because the other person, when they come and tell you, no, I'm talking about the same thing. I'm talking about justice. I'm talking about democracy. I'm talking about health. I'm talking about the value of animal, value of life. I'm talking about all these things, but they have a very different interpretation. Then if your identity is linked to your understanding of that concept, you will feel threatened. You will feel that this is an attack on who I have defined myself as a vegetarian, for example. Right? So it's like a condition for the practical success. You can think of it like this.
Yeah, thank you. So from your explanation, I take it that this fundamentalism, being a fundamentalist or non-fundamentalist, it cannot be summarized in rules in a way. So unlike like authoritative, authoritative claims, we can come up with like explicit rules about it, but the other one is dynamic and contextual.
Yes, and I mean, now actually I'm a lot of my like engagements. I think for the next because some other thing I'm doing has to do with the specific rules that must. How can we, if you're watching a video, two people arguing, what should you look at in order to determine if the giving and receiving of arguments is authoritarian or non-authoritarian? It has to be external. It has to be something that you observe. But the fundamentalist, non-fundamentalist attitude, it's harder to pinpoint by specific procedures. But I think what we can do, and this is what I try to do, is just to give the structural dynamics. How does it work? And there might be other dynamics for it. I mean, in my opinion, confusing your truth as the truth, to put it simply, is like a central, crucial dynamic. And I think it's very widespread today, and many people are suffering, I think, from that. And this is, I think, one of the reasons also, I mean, this is maybe the implicit, hidden impact of one of the impacts of social media, etc. Just being constantly, even the stuff about echo chambers, etc. It all reinforces the same idea, right? You're stuck in your own. You think you're right, and so what ends up happening? We are getting polarized, increasingly so, and it's very hard to communicate across these separations. And I mean, this is in some sense what's really motivating me, in terms of democratic theory and things that are relevant for everyday life.
Okay, and may I have a follow-up on this? So about what you say, like my truth is the truth, but how do you reconcile this with the claim that the content of your belief, like the justification that, for instance, you believe because of divine authority is the truth by definition, isn't it?
And okay, great. So this is why, I mean, all of this started from the original argument I made in my, like many years ago in my dissertation about the possibility of believing that there exists a divine authority, and hence it's absolute, objective, etc. And you have access to it because you have revelation. The religious person has revelation, right? Is it possible for someone like this to not reason in authoritarian ways, not to reason as if they really have the truth? I mean, they think they have the big T truth, and that they don't question, right? Like you don't question that, and this is precisely what I argued: is that yes, you can, because You see, you cannot, I mean, being authoritarian in your interaction with others, first, being authoritarian is not similar to what sometimes the literature called dogmatic, that you're believing something without proof. But I don't think this is the case with religion. At least it doesn't have to be. I mean, many people believe and they have very good reasons for believing. It's not a dogma. They just like it, or it's convenient, or just inherit it. That is also presence. Okay. But I think, and I distinguish between three types of modes of reasoning: reasoning within myself, reasoning with another, and interacting or reasoning with an institution. And I think in these three situations, I argue specifically in the case of Islam, drawing on the works of Rashid al-Ghanouchi, is that there are resources internal to the Islamic tradition that can fend off the charge of authoritarian reasoning on the level of self, on the level of the duo with another dialogue, and on the level of the state. So it's possible. I say in principle, at least. Now, I think in practice it's difficult, but I think it's also very much present. And I know people like this. And I think most of us do. But the majority, because of the polarization, etc., boxes and interprets this in different ways, right? And I think this is part of the problem. I don't know if I was able to explain myself, but yeah.
Thank you.
Karim Hocam, I have a question. Ali Said Hocam, if this is okay for you, I will ask one question and then we will go for the second round. Thank you again, Karim Hocam. I think this is a very interesting topic, an important topic. Last talk we have in our field talk was called Ethics of Loneliness. And there the speaker presented a lot of cases that people feel lonely. And actually, when you look at these cases, the reason why they feel lonely, for me, this is my interpretation, of course, they actually feel not heard politically. So they were not able to express what they suffer, the injustice. So this necessarily, I guess, bringing this emotion loneliness. So I guess this is why it's very important, because political inclusion is necessary in many ways, ontologically, psychologically. So it is an important topic. This is just one remark, but my question is related to John Rawls. In order to understand your talk better, your distinction about reason and way of reasoning, I have a question. I guess you said John Rawls is exclusive. I guess it is clear when he says this theory is for modern democratic societies. I guess he's already saying that this is a somehow Western secular theory of justice. So is this the reason you say it is exclusive? Because the second question related to this is, on the other hand, he is kind of inviting us to a special way of reasoning, a veil of ignorance, and related to this reasoning process. Isn't he inclusive in this sense, his theory? So what do you think, Hocam?
Thank you. I think Rawls is an exclusivist, and I think in the literature he's considered, treated as like this is the clear example, right? In what sense is he an exclusivist? So simply, given the definition I worked with, is simply as for Rawls, religious reasons, just focus on that, should not be allowed to play a justificatory role in lawmaking. Why? Well, he's gonna say, well, listen, just public justification is for everyone, is for the public.
Mhm.
And public justification is not only about validity and things like that. It's about addressing the people who are listening to you. Therefore, you have to treat them as free and equals. I mean, this is what the entire, theory of justice is based on, right? Okay. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean for roles to treat others as free and equal? His answer is, well, you treat them as free and equal if you offer to them justifications that are for what the term is like typically mentioned is reasons that all can accept. Raka, reasons that all can accept, right? Type is religious reasons all can accept? No, because there are atheists, etc. So you end up excluding it. Why it's very important for Rawls to do this? Because he's after political authority, legitimate political authority. Now, he developed the notion of public reasoning mainly in his political liberalism after theory of justice. And theory of justice is where, the critique against theory of justice is that, this applies for the, liberal societies, etc. So then he developed his thought. I mean, at least the way I see it is that he said, okay, now I'm going to consider that the fact of pluralism, the burdens of judgment, we disagree, we start with good intentions, same assumptions, we end up with very, very different. This is the burdens of judgment. So we have to live with this. How can we organize ourselves, create a cooperative society, right, if we accept the fact of pluralism? So the only way to do it is through this, let's public reason, right? The justification of law has to be based on reasons that all can accept. There's a lot of literature on what does that mean exactly, but what matters to me is that the talk is about reasons. And so I want to push the pluralism to the maximum. I want to say, if you're going to have different types of reasons, then there must be reasons included and reasons excluded. So if you have reasons that are excluded, I'm saying these excluded reasons, they are someone's reasons. Right?
Yeah.
And okay, so I don't want that. But I realize this is very problematic because if you include all reasons, you have a chaos. I mean, what is the standard now? How do you regulate? How do you come up with some kind of an agreement? Rawls is a consensus democratic theorist. He needs consensus. So how do you get that? So I'm saying, I agree with if you want Rawlsian intuition in the sense that you need to have restrictions. Otherwise, you have problems. Now, the restrictions I want to impose don't target reasons. They target the way we exchange reasons. It might not be solid enough to generate political legitimacy the way the liberals think about it. But for me, this is fine. Why? Because it may be we are losing some political legitimacy, but we are gaining on building citizenship. And so for me, it's more important, especially in times of crisis, to build citizenship, maintain the relationship with each other, even if we disagree, and even if anyway, we are living in, pretty difficult situations. And it just gets stuck to an ideal that we are not able to, just because we have a very good, nice, logical system that works well and we can defend it and, and it's a very good, I mean, I have all kinds of problems with Rawls, but I mean, you have to respect him. It's very strong. And I agree also with other, I'm not completely against Rawls. But anyway, I'm not a Rawlsian scholar. I'm just saying that I think what is key for me is this shift from the target of the norm that is supposed to regulate. What is your criteria addressing? Is it addressing the reasons, or is it addressing the way we are? And are we regulating what you are saying or how you are saying it? And I want to regulate how. At least. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you hocam. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Ali Said hocam, please go ahead. I guess it's your turn. If no one else has no one else wants to ask question, I guess we can go on to second round.
I have a question.
Please hocam.
Because of other things, it would be ideal for me to stop 6 minutes ago, but it's okay.
Okay.
We can go on. We can go on another maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay,
I can,
then we
so.
get Ali Said hoca's question and then we can finish the talk.
Hocam, okay,
Thank
thank you. Just, I wonder this question. Let's talk about real politics. I think we sympathize all with this idea, non-fundamentalist, non-authoritarian idea. It's okay, very nice and very innocent idea. But in the real politics, in our case, in this case of the world, very simple question: what is the chance of this discourse, and what is the condition of possibility of this discourse, non-authoritarian, non-fundamentalistic idea? I like very much a French writer, Maurice Blanchot. I read just one remark of him. He says, if Messiah comes up, he should be tyrannic for imposing the rules of justice. So he should be violent, he said. So it is my question. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I mean, this is maybe the privilege of being in something called the university and academia, is that we get to have the chance to think about alternative ways before feeling that, okay, violence is the only way, or I understand today why some people might feel this, but this is a different, this is a different kind of level of operation. Even things, to put it even more abruptly, think of something as contradiction. If you as a professor, you contradict yourself, it's a serious charge. I'm telling you, you're contradicting yourself, Jam. One time you tell me this, one time you are, yeah. But as an activist on the street, who doesn't care? Contradiction, I want my thing, So I'm not talking about that, but I think your question, if I have anything to say about your question, and I think I do, it's in terms of what my talk, how is this relevant? It's relevant, I think, first, and maybe crucially, it's relevant in pinning, like making sure not to lose our orientation. And philosophy, in some sense, someone might tell you, in my country, if someone wants to tell you, stop talking bullshit, shut up, they will tell you, stop philosophizing. But because philosophy is just like talk. But because people don't feel the relevance of it. But I think one of the important relevance of philosophy is gives you a direction, it gives you clarity of things, certain clarity that allows you to maybe better navigate. And in this scenario, in this case, some clarity about what is democracy, what is thinking together, what is authoritarian, what is emancipation, is helpful. The second thing I want to say, back to the question of Isaac Hoxha, is yes, you have to work on yourself. This person that finds that the only option for them is to make violence and just take revenge in some way, for example, they have to do self-work. I'm not saying that I'm not judging, is it justified, not justified, understandable, not understandable. But if we want to live in a world together, right? And I'm excluding the possibility of living in a world together where only the powerful will rule, and that's it. It just becomes like some kind of the rule of the jungle. which we might be moving in this, and maybe it has always been like this. This is and for me an open question, but I'm an idealist here. Even if it has been like this, and even if it will always be like this, and I want to go to the extreme here, I think we have, as humans, as individuals, as thinkers, we have a duty to think about these things and do whatever we can, even if they don't have an impact. At least you can preserve your humanity inside of the jungle. I mean, this is one kind of approach you can take it. Yeah.
Thank you, John. I got my answer. Thank you.
Okay. I said many things. I got myself into trouble, maybe. No, but this is, I mean, thank you all for this, in this, the question. Yeah, it's.
You are very consistent, John. No problem. I think.
Okay.
Thank you, Karim Hocam. And Noor is saying that she thanks you and she's looking forward to the final outcome of your paper.
Inshallah.
And Müge Hoca is sharing a quote from Oscar Wilde. In matters of grave importance, style, not sincerity, is the vital thing.
I like it.
Yeah.
Okay. Ali Vera.
Okay.
Oh, Salam Ali. Okay.
Thank you very much, Karim Hocam.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Hocam.
This intense and thoughtful talk. And thank you everyone for joining. And yeah, we are looking forward to seeing you in the next talk, next philosophy field talk.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.